Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows, and welcome to KwaZulu-Natal and to a small, fairly innocuous-looking destination that until not long ago wasn't nearly as well known as it is today, having become in a very short space of time a site of pilgrimage for gourmands not just from across South Africa, but indeed around the world. So how has that happened? Well, the living room, which is where I find myself today, was at the end of 2022 named the Eat Out Woolworths Restaurant of the Year. Johannes and Johanna, the rectors, put together this little space on the outskirts of Durban that has now become one of the most sought after dinner tables you can find in the country. And so I'm down to make my debut, to check out the food, to check out the wine, because Johanna, the Austrian-born German-trained sommelier, is an exceptional sommelier, and like all of the best sommeliers, practices an art, a craft, not a mere profession, and does so with such excitement. She delivers some really interesting wine on her list to complement her husband's food, or at least that's what I've been told and what I'm expecting. And so I shall play out this evening by trying this fabulous food and wine combination at one of the great modern restaurants of South Africa. But while I'm completely overindulging myself, and very happily so, I'll be taking you back to a couple of tastings I've done in the last little while. Later on in the show, I catch up with Matt and the team from Vondeling. Now, they've brought out the latest iteration of a wine that's got some really big awards already. It's a Bordeaux blend that has captured the imagination of both critics and the wine drinker in the street. And we look back not just at the latest release, and it's a cracker, but some of the ones that have gone before and track the evolution of a really cool Vondeling wine that has become a favourite of so many. But before we do that, it's time to look at some brand new wine from a very established house. And I say house deliberately because it is a house of bubbles, the house of Graham Beck. Graham Beck used to do still wines. They changed a decade or so ago to just focusing on bubbles, and it's a change that has certainly paid off. And they've added to their array with 3 brand new wines, and I got the chance over lunch with the cellar master to see what those new wines are, and in particular how a grape we very rarely see in South Africa has become a single varietal bubbles par excellence. In the world of bubbles, there are some names you never ignore. You don't ignore Mouton Chandon, you don't ignore Veuve Clicquot, you don't ignore a man called Patson from Graham Beck, because when he sends you an invitation and says you must come for lunch, you make sure you do.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Pierre. I'm the cellar master at the House of Graham Beck. I've been working for Graham Beck now for the Beck family estate for 14 years and moved into the cellar master position about 3 years ago. And all that means is that I've a hell of a responsibility to keep the consistency and the continuity of the non-vintage style, but to innovate and elevate our own brand through new releases, innovation, experimentation, and today we are going to officially launch 3 brand new wines. Right, so we're going to kick off with the Blanc de Blanc. Just means white from white grapes. In South Africa, 95% of Blanc de Blancs are made from Chardonnay only, 100% Chardonnay. Although that is not a rule, that's not a law, you can make the Blanc de Blanc from other white cultivars as well. And interestingly, one of the wines that we are launching today is a Blanc de Noir, obviously meaning white from black. So it's nice to see those two as a contrast next to each other. So we make this Blanc de Blanc every single year. It's not a recipe that we follow, but there's a tradition that we follow where, like I say, we only use our own grapes. When we press the grapes, the whole bunches that we receive at the cellar, we press only the first 400 liters per ton, which means it's a super gentle squeeze. You know, we achieve that extraction at 0.5 bars of pressure. That's really not a lot. So it's the most beautiful juice that we get out of the grapes. The rest of the juice that we press out will go into the Brut non-vintage and really helping those wines to attain a bit of complexity. And then we take 50% of the base wine fermented in old French oak barrel size called Pierre Champenoise. Pierre Champenoise is a specific size of 205 liters. It stays in those barrels for 6 months before we blend it with the stainless steel fermented portion, and then it goes to bottling Generally speaking, we're bottling that same vintage in June of that year. So we start harvest in January, we start bottling in June. So it's 5 to 6 months that the wines lie on the primary lease. And then we blend it and we bottle it, and our Blanc de Blanc currently spends 5 years on the lease. So the wine is vibrant, it's beautiful, lemons, limes, you get a little bit of pear, and then you get those typical Robertson Chardonnay aromatics of peaches and apricots as well. A little bit of spice from the barrels. But the vibrancy and the acidity of the wine keeps it so lively, even though it's so complex and creamy thanks to the 5 years on the lease. So then we move over to a new release. In between our vintage range and the Cuvée Clive, which is the pinnacle of our production, our prestige Cuvée, it left quite a breach to cover, you know, not just price-wise, but also quality-wise. It's a big jump. So it afforded us the opportunity to bring in a range called the Artisan Collection, and this is really a playground for myself, Peter, the winemaking team, to go and get quirky, get experimental, and do things in a different way, you know, a little bit outside of the norm. One of the things that we were playing around with in recent times is a graft fermentation or cork fermentation. Generally speaking, the second fermentation for Cap Classique is done under a crown cap, so you put a little crown cap, much like a beer cap, over the top of the bottle, and that keeps all the pressure inside as the secondary fermentation is running, which means obviously then the CO2 cannot escape and it gets impregnated into the volume of the wine. But if you do that with a cork, you get a completely different mouthfeel. And we call the little staple that's keeping the cork in place, that's called agrafe in French. So the term agrafe just showcases that it was cork fermented. Now this is a stumbling block for a lot of people. Is it meneer? Is it meunier? Is it manure? It's not manure, I promise you. It's much nicer than that. But Pinot Meunier is a chimeric genetic mutation of Pinot Noir. So if you know the Pinot family, I'm sure you would have heard of Pinot Grigio or Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir, Pinot Blanc, which is very little of. We don't really see that in South Africa. And then there's Pinot Meunier. Now, very little known in South Africa. There's only 16 hectares planted of this grape variety in South Africa. But in Champagne, it's one of the top 3. It accounts for 1/3 of all Champagne grape plantings. So it's a very important cultivar in Champagne, normally used to soften blends and bring a little bit of more red fruit aromatics to the blends and make it more accessible at a younger age. But also recently, more of the grower champagnes are starting to showcase Meunier on its own. And last year, we as a Cap Classique Association, we had a couple of members, went to go visit the Meunier Institute in Champagne. And it was such a revelation for us to see these beautiful wines that they make out of 100% Pinot Meunier. Pinot Meunier obviously being one of the Champagne cultivars, the kind of aromatics you can look for here, and I'm not prescribing it. I hate telling people what they should be smelling, because as soon as I say it, you're going to probably smell it, because that's the way we are wired. But typical when you look at Pinot Meunier is ripe red fruit, red apples, white peach, a little bit of spicy and earthiness depending on how it was fermented as a base wine. Ours does give a little bit of spiciness thanks to the amphora and the wood. You know, both of them do elevate a bit of spicy tones. And then floral notes, you know, quite fresh floral notes. It's very typical of Pinot Meunier. Last in the tasting, last but not least, is Cuvée Clive. Cuvée Clive is our prestige cuvée, our pinnacle of our production. We only produce this in exceptional vintages. We have been very fortunate in the sense that since we've gone over to a specialist Cap Classique producer, we've been enabled to spread our net quite wide. I talked to you earlier about all the different vineyard sites we work with. So we have not had an excuse or not had a situation where we didn't have a quality wine to produce a Cuvée Clive since 2017. Touch wood. Cuvée Clive, 95 Chardonnay, 5 Pinot Noir. 60% of the blend was barrel fermented in old French oak barrels. 6 years on the lease. Cuvée Clive has got a minimum time on lease of 5 years. I love to see this wine go to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. This is really for us the pinnacle of what we produce, and I invite you to take a bottle of this. When somebody says yes, but it's not champagne, open a bottle of champagne at the same price and compare it with this wine. And I promise you, 9.5 times out of 10, this wine is going to outshine that champagne at the same price, and you're going to go and buy this wine again and not that champagne.
So 3 brand new editions seeing the light today for the first time here at the Prawnery with Pierre. The yin and the yang, this is proper geek bubbles territory. Exactly the same wine, bottled the same day, everything is the same except one under cork and the other under cap. And there is a discernible difference. Not much of it left though, so good luck trying to get some. There will be a bit more though. The Pinot Meunier, the grape we see so little of here in South Africa. It's a commonplace addition to champagne, but for South Africa, a real novelty and all the more welcome for it. Throw into that the Ultra Brut with its almost negligible sugar, the Blanc de Blanc, and then that Cuvée Clive that sets the benchmark every year for Cap Classique in South Africa. And once again, it's a triumph from Graham Beck.
So that's some brand new stuff from the team at Graham Beck. I think that Pinot Meunier is the really exciting one for me. A, because it's really good, and B, because we just do not get Pinot Meunier in this country. So a really, really cool addition to that range. The Cuvée Clive is always a delight. Time and again, it strikes gold all over the world. If there's anything we have that can consistently stand toe-to-toe with top champagnes, this has been a wine in recent years that has done exactly that. And then also the experimentation. I love the fact that Pierre, as winemaker, is having so much fun at the Graham Beck team and producing the kind of wine that allows us, the people who drink it all, to experiment, to have fun, and to discover just how much potential there is to do really cool stuff with bubbles in South Africa. Now, wine across the board in South Africa is doing really cool stuff, and this is a great example of a really cool sommelier doing really cool stuff. This is Monsieur. You kind of got to say like you're Belgian after a few beers. It comes out of the Hemelanada, and it's one of those whites where you look at it first, you think, oh, they must have just found a whole pile of things in a cupboard and thrown them together to get rid of them. And then you drink the wine and you realize there's a very good reason. All of the different elements, I think there are 6 or 7 varietals in this wine, have been brought together for this layered, textured, intense wine that on its own is terrific, but with food even more so. In this particular dish, there's a sorbet, looks like it might be avocado, it's actually garden greens, it sits on a bed of guava, there's some floral touches in there, not just for the aesthetic, but they add to the depth and flavour as well. And this combination, it's just an utter delight. And what you see here, there's a chef and a sommelier who are working in perfect tandem, and well, that's pretty good because they are married and you hope these things would work as they do. It makes it such a cool experience. We're, I think, 3 into our 19 courses so far today. It's going to be a really cool evening, but already this is an illustration of food and wine at its very best here in South Africa. I've got loads more to do, so rather than bore you any longer with my indulgence, let me send you off to the Prawnery, where they don't only do prawns, they do a whole range of great food and also some rather nice wine. Matt Copeland is the man at Vondeling, and the Bordeaux blend he has got a load of great awards of late, and the reason for that is that he's doing it incredibly well. So we went back some past vintages, tasted the latest one, and together got a feel for a great winemaker making great wine.
The last time I got to hang out with Matt Copeland from Vondeling was in Camps Bay, where he was unleashing upon us his madcap, part traditional, part crazy winemaker method ancestral, which he somehow tamed and crafted into something rather lovely. Today it's a little more conventional, and it's somewhere far more beautiful, because who would want to be in Camps Bay when you have the natural charm and easygoing delight of central Johannesburg? Matt, welcome up to the big city.
Thank you very much.
Lovely to have you here. And although the wine we're drinking is very different, there is a very clear thread, because both of these wines speak to a very specific philosophy of wine, which is reflected here in the name, and also your general approach on how you like to present wine to the world.
Yeah, so I'm quite fond of Bordeaux wines. These are all Bordeaux blends, so they've got high proponents of either Cabernet or Merlot, with their friends included as well. And what they are is just pushing the boundaries, trying to approach the absolute pinnacle of what we can do. So when we initiated this project, and it started in 2011, although the first vintage is in 2014, that was the idea, and it was very foreign for me. I'm quite tight-fisted. So to say, don't worry about cost was unnatural. And so the idea was we wouldn't worry about tonnage in vineyard, we wouldn't worry about labor, and we would sort each berry individually, and barrels, only the finest, that sort of thing. And here we are, well, more than 10 years later, but 10 years after the first vintage of this wine.
You've taken us through a journey in the build-up to this. You were telling me about some of the years and telling me about some of the stories behind it. And I think that's a beautiful part of this wine, not just the style in which you've made it, but also that each wine has a particular narrative to it. So let's go back to that very first one in 2014. And first of all, have a look at the label, because all of these labels are very eye-catching. What is 2014's story?
So, like I said, in 2011, when it started, we had a terrible fire on the Paardeberg, and of course, Vondeling is on the Paardeberg, and we really came to appreciate how profoundly beautiful and special the Paardeberg is, because we lost so much of the flora and fauna, and so we initiated a huge research project with botanists in our employ for 2 years, and we wrote a book about the regeneration of the mountain post the fire. And we thought, well, because it's so special, we need to tell people about it, and what better message than through wine, obviously. And so we launched the Philosophy 2014 with the first flower that emerges post fire, generally in the Western Cape. And each label that we use is unique to that vintage and celebrates a unique flower to the Paardeberg, because of course the conditions that would allow for that flower to uniquely grow in the Paardeberg obviously influences our grapes and makes our wines similarly unique.
So there's a wonderfully regenerative story to this, and you've kicked it off with a beautiful aesthetic. What about the wine? What's this wine telling me compared to when it started? How have you seen it evolve?
Well, the 2014 was a landmark year for us in more ways than one. It was quite wet, particularly in spring. So what you would call a late winter. I think it was the wettest spring in sort of history. And we learned a very valuable lesson. In our farming and in my education in wine, the idea was always to withhold water because that would give you more concentration, things like that. But then we had this fantastic vintage in 2014, which is not recorded as a fantastic vintage in South African history, but it was for us because we are quite dry and we are quite warm. So given that the grapes were so awesome, I then went and had a slightly better look at what the conditions are in Bordeaux, and I discovered that they have a huge amount of rain during their growing season. And we were miles away from that in terms of irrigation. But this year slightly mimicked that. So with that in mind, this is an incredible year to kick off with. It's very Bordeaux-esque in that it initially had some of those slightly vegetal elements. The tannin was extra fine. You didn't have that very rich, juicy fruit that you'd have in the more opulent years. So it had that restrained French elegance that you get sometimes. And we've subsequently adapted our irrigation practices. So this is now 10 years old.
And 10 years old in Magnum. How much of a difference has that had, given that this and the ensuing vintages have all been in the slightly bigger bottles?
Yeah, so we always put a portion of the wine into Magnums, and that's for people that really want to collect the wine. And I must stress this is collectible in that there's a unique artist every year. Each bottle is numbered, and there's less than 1,900 bottles generally made, and that includes 120 Magnums. So if you can get your hands on this,
You've done well.
you've got a fairly unique product.
We move on to 2015. 2014, as you say, not the greatest South African vintage, but it worked rather nicely for you, and the evidence is still there to be seen a decade on. What about 2015? It was particularly in Stellenbosch and red, such a rock star vintage. It had the iconic Paul Sauer 100 points and had everybody very, very, very excited. It might have possibly been overtaken by 17 in terms of longevity. What was 15 like for you, and how do you see it going 9 years on?
Yeah, I think 15 was one of those almost perfect years where the vines were very happy after a wet 14. We had a normal cold winter, which is always great because that means your vines rest very well. And then we had a kind of a normal summers. And normal is good when you're making wine because it becomes predictable and you can preempt the problems and really get the best out of your vineyards. So yeah, no particular heat waves, fantastic Cabernet year. This is a Cabernet dominant blend. And yeah, just has a little bit more juiciness, a little bit more of those cassis and things like that. So yeah, it's an exciting vintage.
Exciting wine, exciting label as well. Another year, another artist. Tell me about this one.
Right, so this one is quite unique. It's a British artist. And what she uses is she carves the image into wooden block. So it's a block print.
And that is represented. In fact, we've got it right there, just over my shoulder. It is a very striking piece. Was there a particular thought process behind that one?
Yeah, we do try and have a flower be the sort of flag bearer stylistically of the wine as well. And this particular flower has the common name of peacock flower or star of winter. So it is outstanding.
All right, as is the wine. 9 years on, also lovely and fresh. That Magnum helps. On to 2016, and again, so 14 and 16 were the 2 years that couched 15. 16, I found with a lot of South African wines, it's taken a while, but quietly coming into its own once given a little time. Have you seen 16 from start to where it is now?
Yeah, 16 we took a chance. So I love Merlot. Maybe I just root for the underdog, I don't know. But I like the finesse and the elegance that Merlot tends to bring, especially to the blends. And so in 2016, the Merlot I found to be so outstanding. It was superior to the Cabernet. And so we put the Merlot in front, and it's the only vintage to date where we have put the Merlot in front. So the label reflects that vibrancy that you can expect from Merlot as well. And I think there's an elegance and a freshness and verve to it that really celebrates that characteristic.
As the big boss of the Merlot Forum in South Africa, I'm a little surprised it's only been one of them that's had Merlot as the top act.
Well, watch this space. So we're now on the 2017, and the 2017 we don't want to box the artist in. This is a local artist, Makiwe, has a studio in Franschhoek, and it's just beautiful. If you look at the label, it's a young child, and the child, in fact, is holding the flower in her hand. And there was a little bit more restraint, but there was a kind of a tenderness in the imagery and in the wine. 17, of course, is very celebrated vintage. This one garnered five stars, 96 points in the Platter Guide, and it sort of set the stage for the incredible 2019. There was no 2018 made.
Tell me about that. Was that because the wine didn't live up to standards, or because you just couldn't persuade William Kentridge to do a label for you?
Bit of both, but no, the truth of it is the drought year, we ran out of water. And Cabs and Merlots, because they're such late ripeners, the Cab in particular, you don't have water, you just can't get there.
It's always a tough call to have to make in the wine industry, but it's one for the greater good. And the long-term investment was keeping us waiting to this. I'm going to bring this over because this is the new release. Even if you are a dedicated Vondeling wine collector, you almost certainly won't have seen this just yet, because this is brand new, which for many people seem a little odd because, hang on, this is 2019, that can't be brand new. But
Yep.
Again, philosophy is overarching, and you're hanging on to these until you feel comfortable to introduce them to the world.
Yeah, so I mean, the frightening thing about these wines is that they take 5 years before. So decisions I'm making 5 years ago, we're now going to talk about in the glass and gauge whether they're successful or not. And I think you'll agree with me that a 5-year-old wine, this is extremely tight and fresh. and they are purposefully made to be cellared and kept. Not to say that they don't have charm when they're young, but to be outstanding and to be revered over time, they have to be able to stand the test of time. So that's very much in the philosophy of the wine. And of course, after 2 years when they're bottled, they then get cellared very well at a nice cold, deep temperature, which helps a lot.
It's very much just starting to stretch its legs. Needs a good few years of solid yoga and calisthenics to unwind properly. But it's going to be in good company as it does that, because again, an absolutely beautiful label. You've continued this trend. They're all strikingly individual, but they all really do catch the eye. Talk me through the 2019 label.
The 2019 is quite fun because, in fact, it's taken the name of the flower that is the flag bearer for our other red blend, which is non-Bordeaux, so it's a Shiraz-based blend, the Monsonia speciosa. And, of course, what's unique about it in the Paardeberg is it's a totally different color to anywhere else in the Western Cape. Why? Nobody knows. But, of course, the Paardeberg is an island within the landscape around it and has been isolated uniquely for a long time.
You've got this terrific selection of wines, terrific selection of labels with them. They're not just full of great Bordeaux-style red, they're also full of memories. When you as a winemaker, when you look back on these, how nostalgic is that process?
Yeah, very nostalgic because it marries so many different creative forces. You know, you've got farming, which is a creative process, especially if you're farming for wine, you know, it's very nuanced. Then you've got the actual fermentation, cellaring, and all that sort of thing. 2019, we've moved away from natural cork. I do find there's a slightly purer expression in the 19, and yeah, the journey just continues.
What I love about the Vondeling engagements we have is it's not always terrific wine, but there's always such a broad thought process. You clearly spend a lot of time running through how you want to approach these, how you want to express them, and bringing in touches like the labels just complete that story. So thank you for these. I think we're going to enjoy them this evening.
Definitely.
But I suspect with all of these, not just the 19 all the way back to the 14, there's still plenty more time to enjoy them as they continue to unfold. And I suspect there'll be many more conversations to have about wine and art over the years to come.
Yeah, this is a project which hopefully will outlive me. So yes, absolutely.
There we go. From the Prawnery in the heart of Johannesburg, you can see how lit up the face of Matthew Copeland is. It's that combination of beautiful wine, amazing art, and just the laid-back joy of life in Johannesburg. So that there in the library here at the living room is Jerusalem Yotam Ottolenghi, one of my favourite cookbooks. I use it a lot, the chicken sofrito, so easy to make, even I can produce it. It is a winner. There's also an Anthony Bourdain in there as well, two of the great names in modern cooking, and they find themselves in good company being in the library of Johannes Richter, because Johannes's food, as I've discovered this evening, is sensational, and the wine has been a dream. The pairings were done brilliantly. Not everybody always gets them right, and not everybody always backs themselves to go with something that can really bring out a sense of excitement in food and wine coming together. But Johanna has done exactly that. The wine itself was great, but in concert with the food, absolutely terrific. And part of the great wine that we've seen on the show this evening, those new Graham Becks, that Pinot Meunier, is a delight. You're going to battle to get hold of it. They make so little. There's hardly any Pinot Meunier here in South Africa. I've only had it before as a straight varietal bubbles coming out of Champagne. But if you do get hold of some, it's a fascinating wine to drink and a most enjoyable one. And then the science experiments to go with them, the cork versus cap, just showing how much you can do in the cellar to create something that's got those small but appreciable differences in style and in delivery. And the Vondeling as well, some great wine from Matt Copeland. He's creating a really special legacy at Vondeling. I really like him and his company. I really like his wine, and I think this particular wine, one we saw this evening, is a terrific endorsement of that. And that leaves me really then, before I head off for a nightcap with the chef and sommelier, to invite you to come down here, come to the living room, come and check it out. The food and wine combination is dazzling,
and it really is a South African outpost that you need to make a visit to. Austria and Germany's loss, very much KwaZulu-Natal's gain, and for all the headline acts that Cape Town, Stellenbosch and Johannesburg tend to offer up for our restaurant lists, the fact that this little spot here in KwaZulu-Natal is on a par with and better than so many others is a real feather in the cap for Durban dining. That does it for the show. Dan Really Likes Wine with Norman Goodfellows. Huge thank you to the team here for looking after us and to Joe for facilitating it all. We'll see you back again next week. Goodbye.